Yeah. All right. Ibtisam? Thank you. No, just a little classroom chatter here. All right. The Secretary General delivered remarks today by video message to the 9th Biological Weapons Convention Review Conference, which is taking place in Geneva, in Switzerland. He reminded the participants that 50 years ago, the global community stood as one and declared that the deliberate use of disease as a weapon is an affront to humanity. Biological weapons are a clear and present danger, he said, adding that strengthening the Biological Weapons Convention is more important now than ever. The Secretary General called for action in 3 specific areas. First, teeth to the Convention's accountability provisions to ensure scientific advances are not exploited for hostile purposes. Second, update our thinking on verification and compliance that fit today's war threats. And finally, given the Convention the increased financial, and third, give the Convention the increased financial and human resources it needs to carry out its important work. The review conference will continue until the middle of next month. Turning to Ethiopia, our humanitarian colleagues tell us they have seen some gradual and tangible improvements in access into the Tigray region following the recent cessation of hostilities agreement. Since mid-November, aid deliveries have begun moving into Tigray, including to Mekele along the Samara and Kombolcha corridors, and to other parts of Tigray along the Gondar corridor in Amhara. Humanitarian flights for staff have also resumed for Mekele and have started for Shire as well. From the 15th to the 24th of November, more than 450 trucks carrying aid by the government and by UN as well as NGOs arrived in Tigray. The majority of this is food aid as well as medical supplies and agricultural supplies. Some fuel and cash have also been brought in. However, our humanitarian colleagues stress that what has arrived in Tigray remains far from what is actually needed to meet the huge needs in the area. More than 5 million men, women, and children are in need of food assistance, and an estimated 30% of children are facing acute malnutrition. Sustaining and building on these movements to ensure that the required food and other items can reach all those in need is critical. Access to most parts of neighboring areas of Amhara and Afar have also improved in recent weeks. We, along with our partners, are providing food and other assistance, including to displaced people and those who have returned. However, we need to be able to scale up our work to help all those in need. In addition, Ethiopia is experiencing a historic drought, and in the Bale zone of Oromia and the Liban zone of the Somali region, there's an ongoing cholera outbreak. Nearly 500 people have been impacted, including 20 deaths. Hundreds of thousands more remain at risk. We, along with our humanitarian partners, are providing health and water and sanitation assistance. Humanitarian colleagues note that the conflict in Western Oromia also continues to drive people from their homes and has hampered our ability to provide aid. Turning to Ukraine, the humanitarian coordinator, Denise Brown, traveled over the weekend to Kherson and Mykolaiv in the south of the country to see the humanitarian situation in these 2 cities, meet authorities, and monitor the response provided by aid organizations. Since the start of the war and until recently, Mykolaiv has been shelled almost daily, leaving some 250,000 people who remain in the city completely cut off from water supply and other essential services. Local authorities tell us that now, with the front lines moving further from the city, they're finally able to start to repair the water system. The situation, however, is still critical, and the city continues to receive people fleeing Kherson in recent days, which has been a trend since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Ms. Brown says that to help the people of Mykolaiv and those arriving from other places, humanitarian organizations, with the support of our donors, are coming together and making every effort to support the authorities to prepare the city for the winter. Some heating points have also already been established in Mykolaiv to help people who cannot heat their homes. Aid workers are providing supplies and generators to make these places functional. In Kherson, Denise Brown saw how the supplies provided by the UN and other partners since the government retook control of the city have made a difference in the lives of people. We expect that with the support of the local authorities, we will be able to cover the basic needs of people who have stayed in the city if we're able to sustain the same level of aid sent in the past 2 weeks. The situation with water, heating, and electricity, however, remains dire, although electricity supply is gradually being restored. We continue to be concerned about the plight of civilians in Ukraine, especially as winter sets in. We are working to support people with services and supplies to make sure they can be protected and keep warm during these harsh months. Donors' financial support to the Ukraine's humanitarian response have been extraordinary. We thank them for that, with $3.1 billion received of the $4.3 billion flash appeal for this year. In order to maintain the momentum of the response and continuity of operations to support people across Ukraine over these cold winter months, continued funding is obviously critical. Turning to Central African Republic, you saw over the weekend the Secretary General strongly condemned the attack that took place on Thursday in the Obo airfield in the country's southeast and resulted in the death of one peacekeeper from Morocco. The mission has opened an investigation to establish the facts surrounding the death of our peacekeeping colleague. The Secretary General expressed his deepest condolences to the families of the fallen peacekeeper and to the kingdom and people of Morocco. Turning to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as you may be aware, the third round of consultations of the Nairobi peace process started in Kenya. Today, our peacekeeping colleagues from MONUSCO have been providing operational support to the consultations by transporting representatives of armed groups and local leaders from Ituri, North Kivu, South Kivu to Goma to facilitate their participation. The mission and the Office of the Special Envoy for the Great Lakes expressed their support for the process and will continue to work with all relevant stakeholders to identify political solutions to restore peace in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. Our colleagues say that these consultations can pave the way for Congolese armed groups to engage in the national demobilization, disarmament, community recovery, and stabilization program. Over the weekend, the Secretary General welcomed the mini summit on peace and security in the eastern region of the DRC, which took place in Luanda on November 23rd at the invitation of Angolan President Lourenço. The decisions taken by regional leaders to establish a ceasefire and effect the withdrawal of the M23 from occupied areas. The Secretary General joins his voice to the signatories of the final communique to call on all Congolese and foreign armed groups to immediately lay down weapons and enter respective demobilization, disarmament, and reintegration repatriation process as applicable. As requested by the signatories of the communique, the Secretary General reiterated the availability of our peacekeeping colleagues in MONUSCO to fully support the implementation of all provisions falling under its mandate, as well as the readiness to coordinate with the East African Community Regional Force to provide support to the swift operationalization of the ad hoc verification mechanism established under the Luanda Roadmap to continue to assist the Nairobi process. You just heard from Tor Venisland, the Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, who briefed the Security Council this morning. He said after decades of persistent violence, illegal settlement expansion, dormant negotiations, and deepening occupation, the conflict is again reaching a boiling point. He said the high levels of violence in the occupied West Bank and Israel in recent months, including attacks against Israeli and Palestinian civilians, increased the use of arms, and settler-related violence have caused grave human suffering. The full text was shared with you. Also over the weekend, the Secretary General welcomed the agreement announced by the government and unitary platform of Venezuela and Mexico City to allocate state resources to health, food, education, electricity initiatives that provide social protection and humanitarian assistance to the population. He also took note of the parties' request for UN assistance and expressed our commitment to support them in implementing the agreement in accordance with relevant UN mandates and authorities. A couple of things I want to flag for you. In Malawi, our team, led by the resident coordinator, Maria Dovale Ribeiro, today kicked off a campaign to support authorities in the cholera outbreak response. Nearly 10,000 cholera cases have been confirmed, so far claiming 300 lives. Through the UN Children's Fund, WHO, we've secured approval for 2.9 million oral cholera vaccine doses to protect the most at risk. WHO is also helping authorities train healthcare workers, targeting 14 most impacted districts. and we expect to reach 400 trainers, 2,500 vaccinators, and more than 5,000 volunteers. For its part, UNICEF is disseminating messages on prevention, treatment, and care to 2.5 million people across the country through local media. And UNICEF today released its latest global snapshot on children and HIV and AIDS, showing that around 110,000 children and adolescents died from AIDS-related causes during 2021. UNICEF noted that another 310,000 were newly infected, bringing the total number of young people living with HIV to 2.7 million. Ahead of World AIDS Day, UNICEF warns that progress on HIV prevention and treatment for children and adolescents and pregnant women has nearly flatlined over the past 3 years, with many regions still not at pre-COVID coverage. This comes on top of an existing growing gap in treatment between children and adults. UNICEF warns that unless the drivers of inequities are addressed, ending AIDS in children and adolescents will continue to be a distant dream. And speaking of HIV/AIDS, tomorrow Dr. Cesar Nunez, director of UNAIDS office in New York, will brief you ahead of World AIDS Day. Madame.
Stéphane, would you by any chance have an update on the fate of the 40-something, because they were 49, now they're 47, Ivorian soldiers? Where are they? What is going on? What is the UN is doing?
I mean, we've had contacts at different levels, but there's no update to give.
But do you know where they are? Are they in jail? Are they?
They are not free to go. That's what I know. Joe.
Yes. On Ukraine, first of all, does the UN have any estimate of the number of Ukrainian children who have been forcibly deported to Russia? That's the first question. And then the second question is, since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, to what extent has UN humanitarian relief, along with its humanitarian partners, been able to reach Russian-occupied areas in Ukraine?
We have not, since the beginning of this phase of the conflict, we have not been able to do cross-line and reach areas that are under Russian control. There have been discussions since the beginning for that, but that's not something we've been able to conduct. On your first question, I don't have any numbers with me, but I would encourage you to check with our colleagues in the Human Rights Office, either here or in Geneva. Monsieur.
Hi, Steph. So a couple of questions. First, concerning the disarmament. Today, the Russian side said they postponed the New START treaty talk with the United States in Cairo. They will reschedule for another time. Do you aware of this?
I hadn't seen that report. We are obviously have expressed our concern at the general direction that disarmament talks have been going in recently, which is the opposite direction we would like them to see. But I hadn't seen that particular report.
Okay. Second, today also, Pakistan Taliban announced that they will end ceasefire with Pakistani government, and they have already ordered or threatened new attacks. So do you think this is a thing of concern?
Well, that would be most unfortunate if that is in fact true. Ms. Salome.
Thanks. Excuse me. Thanks, Stéphane. Does the Secretary General have any reaction to the protests in China regarding COVID policies, ongoing or any reaction to the ongoing restrictions due to COVID in that country? Thanks.
Well, I don't have any particular comment on the COVID policies, but obviously we've seen We've seen some of the video of demonstrations, and our reaction is the same one we have for the world over, is that we believe in the importance of people's right to peaceful assembly and association, their right to demonstrate peacefully, and urge the authorities to guarantee that right. Madame, sorry, and then we'll go.
Thank you, Steph. Regarding the Ukrainian nuclear plant, I was wondering if the UN or the IAEA has any update, if there's any update in terms of trying to reduce tensions and, reduce shootings and all that.
I mean, it's something I know our colleagues at the IAEA in Vienna have been in touch with both sides. The situation around the plant continues to be one of concern as the fighting continues.
But is the sense that both sides are involved with, attacking?
There is a conflict and a war going on in Ukraine. There are a number of nuclear power plants in the middle of that conflict. That is our concern. Senor.
Thank you, Steph. A follow-up on Venezuela. Both parties agreed over the weekend that the UN will manage around $3 billion in assets to alleviate the humanitarian crisis in the country. Could you provide us some specifics on how is this mechanism going to work? Is it going to follow any model that the UN has used in any other country in the world? Like, how is this money going to be distributed and oversight at all? Because there's growing concern about how is this money going to be used.
Well, I mean, the social agreement that was announced by the parties doesn't actually state a number. We've seen the number in the press, but we're obviously are in discussion now with the parties on the detail of how our support would work, how the implementation of would work through this kind of UN interagency pooled funds. Those would be that pool of money would be a common fund from which for the UN to manage resources that we're receiving from donors, with the aim of addressing the humanitarian needs that we know exist in Venezuela, and obviously helping them with development and to reach the SDGs.
By the way, does the UN expect at any level that through these assets that have been unfrozen, could they be used maybe for Venezuela to pay all the money that they owe to the UN? Venezuela is currently the only country in the world that don't have any voting rights.
My understanding that these funds would be used for humanitarian purposes. As you know, we had our controller has been in touch with the Venezuelan authorities for a number of times to try to figure out how Venezuela can pay. It's not a reluctance to pay. We know there are obstacles, and those are we're trying to work those out. But that is, as far as I know, separate from these humanitarian funds. Monsieur. Yep. I tried to forget everybody's name during these last 3 weeks. Go ahead.
My question on vessel with Russian fertilizer, which is planning to go to Malawi. So do you have any updates when?
No, we expect movement, I think, in the next 48 hours or so, broadly. But as soon as there is actual movement, we will confirm it, and obviously it will be very much welcomed. Mr. Klein.
You haven't forgotten my name, so I do appreciate that.
I haven't forgotten Gregory's name either.
Okay. Regarding Venezuela and the humanitarian framework agreement, apparently related to that and the resumption of talks between the Maduro government and the opposition, the U.S. Treasury has approved a license to Chevron in Venezuela to resume operations. Venezuela is known for probably producing some of the dirtiest oil in the world. So I wonder if the Secretary General has any comment on that byproduct of this of these agreements.
We were not involved in anything having to do with increasing investment in carbon carbon fossil fuels. The Secretary General's position on the need to invest in green technology as opposed to invest in dirty fossil fuel remains the same. Okay, don't be sorry. Be very sorry.
Yeah. So, do you have actually any comments on the Turkey and their preparation for a ground operation in northern Syria? Thank you.
You know, we obviously, excuse me 2 seconds. You know, we obviously believe strongly in the need to protect the territorial integrity of Syria. It's very important that all parties exercise maximum restraint and avoid any additional regional escalation. We have already seen impact on civilians in Syria, northern Syria, and the impact on civilians and civilian infrastructure is extremely concerning. The Secretary General emphasizes that civilians and civilian infrastructure are to be protected in accordance with international humanitarian law, and it's also very important that all the parties maintain the existing ceasefires that exist between them as it regards to Syria.
But a follow-up, does the Secretary General believe that this operation and other also attacks on northern Iraq by Turkey and before that by Iran goes against the international law and the sovereignty of these countries?
It is clear that the territorial integrity of all these countries, whether it's Syria, whether it's Iraq or any other country, needs to be respected, and that is a bedrock of international law. Countries in the region have security concerns. It's important that those concerns be addressed through dialogue and not increase use of military force. Deji, please.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. I had a. Yeah.
You're even sorrier than Ibtisam.
Sorrier
Yeah.
than very sorry. So I have a follow-up. So tomorrow there is going to be a Security Council meeting on Syria. Who will be the briefer?
Mr. Pedersen will brief, and he will be here in person, and he will also speak to you in person.
Well, that's nice.
It is nice. It's nice for him to answer those questions instead of me. All right. Goodbye. See, and goodbye. Wait. Don't say goodbye. Paulina is here, and she wants to say hello. So.
Hello,
Oh, sorry. Did you have a question, Iftikhar?
Yes.
Please. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
can
go
you
ahead.
hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
In response to the question about end of ceasefire by Pakistan Taliban, you said most unfortunate, if true. Could you please elaborate a little bit?
Well, listen, I personally haven't seen those reports, but obviously any action that leads to increased violence, that could lead to increased acts of terrorism and increased suffering for civilians is something that is of grave concern to us. Paulina,
Thank you very much.
Your turn to express concern.